Chapter 20. Flight of Fancy. Since it had been nearly 5 years since Jenni and the prince had last seen each other, they walked about the courtyard catching up on old times and chatting about their plans for the future. "I wish there was a flower garden here," Jenni commented. "I think a walk among such beauty could only enhance the mood." "I can see only the beauty before me," the prince commented. Jenni giggled. "You didn't really just say that." The prince looked a little hurt for a moment, then he smiled. "Yes, sorry, it did sound a bit cheesy, didn't it? But I mean it. I wouldn't be looking at the flowers, I'd only be looking at you." Occasionally the happy couple would pass someone on their walk. Jenni was quick to pass on the good news, and almost every one of them replied with the same word: "Congratulations." Anita was no different. "Well, congratulations. I'll admit I feel a little surprised." "Surprised?" the prince asked. "There are 4 years between you," Anita explained to the prince. "I thought you'd already be married off by now." It could be strange just how quickly time could fly when you were with someone you loved. Before it seemed possible, the evening was drawing in, and Jenni and the prince were being called in for dinner. Reyes took his seat next to Jenni as he always did, with the prince sitting just on the other side of her. Though Reyes was present, he didn't seem to be all that happy. "Something wrong, Reyes?" the prince asked. There was a gasp of surprise from the Duchess at the sudden realization that Prince Goatee and Reyes were apparently well acquainted. "It's nothing," Reyes responded, playing with his food. "My parents were trying to insist that I should have had dinner in the nursery tonight." "Oh?" the prince commented, sounding sympathetic. "Why? What did you do?" "Nothing," Reyes replied. "They always seem to want to lock me up whenever we have a visiting dignitary." Reyes looked up at the prince and continued, "Still, I'm here now. I suppose I should be happy." "Why are you still in the nursery?" the prince asked. "I would have thought you'd have your own room by now." Jenni interjected. "I'll explain it to you later." "You will?" Reyes looked at her hopefully. Jenni indicated she was referring to the prince, and Reyes's head drooped again. Jenni couldn't help but think that sometime soon she would have to inform the prince. It definitely wasn't a secret she could keep once she was married, and she'd hate for the prince to find out later and assume that she'd been purposely keeping secrets from him. But just how do you broach the subject? "I love you, Prince. Oh, by the way, my brother is a harpy." How could she live with herself if Prince Goatee then decided to have her brother killed? As well as food, dinner consisted of conversation. The Duke, interested in what was happening at the capital and what the other dukes were up to these days, asked question after question of the prince. The Duchess kept her questions to things such as the style of clothing being worn by the wives of the other dukes. Greyforth only asked one question. It was aimed at Jenni, and he didn't finish it because his wife rested a hand on his forearm and shushed him. "So," Greyforth had started to say, "how are you going to explain—" "Explain what?" the prince asked. Greyforth would say no more. As the servants began to clear away the dinner things, the Duke turned to Jenni. "Would you be so kind as to show the prince to his room?" "I would be delighted, father," Jenni replied. Jenni and the prince climbed the stairs together, hand in hand. Then, when they reached the top of the stairs, Prince Goatee stopped sharply and looked around uncertainly. Then he slowly put his finger to his mouth, imploring Jenni to silence. "What is it?" Jenni whispered. "I thought I heard something," the prince whispered back. "Something weird." Jenni sighed. She then tried to guide the prince the other way, saying at a normal level of volume, "This old castle is filled with strange noises. Come on, your room is this way." "1 minute," the prince insisted. His hand rested gently on the hilt of his sword. "It was probably only Agnart," Jenni told him. "Don't worry about it." When Agnart wasn't teaching, she tended to spend most of her time in her room. Despite the fact that the Duke had promised her the run of the castle, it was only in her own room that she felt safe enough to remove the ring that Mangloss had given her, the ring that made her appear to be human. Agnart hated pretending to be human, and would often claim that even without wings, she found herself to be much prettier as a harpy. "Agnart?" the prince asked curiously. "That doesn't sound like a flourish name." "Agnart, yes," Jenni replied. Then, in a lapse of judgment brought on by her feelings for the prince, she added, "She's a harpy, she's—" and that was as far as Jenni got. Prince Goatee, upon hearing the word harpy, unsheathed his sword and ran quickly to the source of the sound, and hence to the door of Agnart's room. The door was unlocked, but the prince barged in, using his shoulder as a battering ram anyway. Then he entered the room. "No!" Jenni yelled after him. "Stop!" The prince emerged from the room a moment later. There was blood on his sword, and an expression of satisfaction on his face. Jenni strode meaningfully up to him and slapped him hard across the cheek. "Hey, what are you doing?" the prince said, annoyed. "Are you in the habit of visiting people and then striking down their guests?" Jenni hissed at him. Tears at the loss of a friend were forcing their way past her anger and onto her cheeks. "She was a harpy," the prince sounded both offended and confused. "Yes," Jenni admitted tearfully, "and she was a friend. She was teaching me and Reyes her language in return for being treated as something other than a monster. Then you come along out of the blue and strike her down as if she doesn't matter. I'm sorry, Prince Goatee, but I really don't think you and I are going to be compatible after all." "But," Prince Goatee tried to defend his actions, "harpies are evil. Everyone knows that. My father's law states that harpies are to be killed on sight." "Then your father's law is wrong," Jenni yelled at him. "But," the prince protested. There was a groan from the room. "She's alive," Jenni said. She brushed roughly past the prince and entered the room. Agnart was lying in a steadily enlarging pool of her own blood. She had 2 large gashes across her chest and was clearly on the edge of death. There was no way she'd survive long enough to get her to Manglos. Jenni settled down next to Agnart. She quickly wiped the tears from her eyes and then placed her hands gently on the wounds. Agnart groaned loudly. Jenni wasn't sure what spell to use. Heal might not do it. Regenerate might not even be enough, especially if Agnart had already lost too much blood. On top of which, it was quite a difficult spell to get right. On the other hand, it could be Agnart's only chance. Jenni began to channel the energy through herself, along her arms, and through her hands into her patient. She concentrated hard on the wounds and tried to imagine them closed. "You know magic?" Prince Goatee said, amazed. "Shh," Jenni replied, not looking around. "I'm trying to concentrate." "Magic is for peasants," Prince Goatee grumbled. "This isn't the time," Jenni hissed back. Slowly, the wounds began to heal. The great slashes from the prince's sword knitted together as if they had never existed. Internal organs also rent by the weapon were soon repaired as good as new. What Jenni didn't notice was that Agnart's wings were also slowly regrowing. A few minutes passed, and despite the obvious fact that the wounds had healed, Jenni began to think that she had lost her patient. Then Agnart opened her eyes. "I'm alive?" she said. She looked about the room doubtfully. "You are," Jenni replied, a tear in her eyes. "I thought we'd lost you." "You speak harpy," Prince Goatee commented, surprised. "What did I tell you Agnart's function was here?" Jenni retorted angrily. She turned her attention back to the harpy. "Sorry, are you all right?" "I feel a little weak," Agnart replied. "What happened?" "My fiancé-to-be happened," Jenni admitted. "I'm sorry." She stood up and helped Agnart get back to her feet. "I'm sorry too," Prince Goatee said meaningfully. Jenni glanced at the prince. Had he really meant that, or was he just saying what he thought Jenni wanted to hear? I misread the situation. Please forgive me," the prince added. Agnart flapped her new wings a couple of times. She had been without them for many years, but they still worked. "You saved my life," she said to Jenni. "I guess so," Jenni admitted. "It was the least I could do." "And you gave me back my wings," Agnart added, disbelieving. "That surprised me too," Jenni admitted. "Thank you," Agnart told her. "In return, I won't kill you." "You won't what?" Jenni just had time to exclaim. Agnart lashed out with her fist. It was a blow that Jenni wasn't ready for and caught her totally by surprise. She fell to the floor, quickly rolling aside before Agnart followed up with a second blow. Agnart did follow up, but did so by attacking the prince next. She kicked him as hard as she could in the stomach, and there was a horrifying squeal of tortured metal as her talons ripped easily through his breastplate. Then, as the prince doubled over in pain, she whacked him over the head, knocking him into unconsciousness. "Don't worry," Agnart said to Jenni. "He'll live. You'll both live." Then she was running as fast as her harpy legs could carry her, out the door and along the balcony to the stairs. Jenni got up. She quickly moved to where Prince Goatee was lying and checked him over. Agnart had destroyed the breastplate he was wearing, but had been careful not to break his skin. He was going to have a nasty bruise on his chest by morning, but at least he was alive. Satisfied the prince would recover, Jenni quickly followed the harpy out of the room. "Agnart!" she shouted. Agnart was already a good way ahead, but Jenni knew she would hear even this far away. "Why are you doing this? You could just walk out the door." Agnart stopped running and turned to face Jenni. She shouted back, "Do you really think I trust the word of a human? The only experience I've ever had with humans is from the point of view of a slave. First as a slave to the circus, and then as a slave bought to teach some duke's children how to speak harpy. Without my wings, I was nothing. There was no life for me beyond these castle walls anyway. Now I have my wings, I can return to my people, and maybe find acceptance in one of the villages." "You should rest," Jenni called to the harpy. "You've only just gotten your wings back. You need to give them time before you use them. Stay with us just a few more days." "And get executed for attacking your prince?" Agnart yelled back. "I don't think so." "At least let me escort you out," Jenni called. There was a tear at her eye again. She had grown quite a liking for Agnart over the last couple of years. "That way, no one will get the wrong idea." "Do you think I'm not aware that now I have wings I'd be considered a potential danger to your people? I'll take my chances alone. I don't intend to lose my wings again," Agnart replied. Then she turned back the way she was going and started to run again. The thing about harpies running was that they weren't very fast. Jenni could have caught her easily, but she kept a reasonable distance and followed Agnart down into the courtyard. There were soldiers in the courtyard. Upon seeing the harpy emerge from the residence, the archers among them immediately began to prepare their bows. "Don't shoot!" Jenni shouted at them. "Let her go." "You're very kind," Agnart said. "Tell the little chief I'm sorry, but I had to leave." "I will," Jenni replied. "Good luck to you, harpy." "Thank you, human," Agnart replied. "Good luck to you too." Agnart removed the human-designed skirt she had been wearing and let it drop into the dust of the courtyard. Then she ran a short distance before launching herself into the air. She had been without her wings for a good few years. It took her a couple of moments to get her balance in the air again, and she almost flew into one of the castle walls. Then she gained some height and turned north towards Elistrade. "You're free," Jenni called after her. "Make the most of your life." She watched as the harpy flew out of sight. Jenni then wiped her eyes and walked slowly back into the residence. As she climbed the stairs back to Agnart's room to find the prince, Jenni couldn't help but think how heartbroken her brother was going to be when he heard that she had left. It was true that Reyes hadn't thought of her in terms of romance for quite a long time now, but Jenni knew that he still had some strong feelings for their teacher. Prince Goatee was sitting on the floor in what had been Agnart's room. He was conscious now and had removed his breastplate. He was examining the bruise on his chest with the shiny surface of what was left of it. "I really am sorry," Prince Goatee said to Jenni as she re-entered the room. "Please don't turn down my trough on the basis of one aberration." Jenni shook her head. She was crying. I feel glad for her. I think she finally got what she wanted. If I had known I could do that, I might have given her back her wings sooner, and maybe we could have parted under better circumstances. "She was a harpy though, right?" the prince commented, unsure, and perhaps a little confused. "She certainly looked like a harpy." "Horse and tiger! Try to understand," Jenni said, exasperated. "The king's law is wrong in this regard. We shouldn't be killing elves, goblins and harpies on sight. We should be trying to talk to them. There shouldn't be an execution order on someone just because of what they were born as. How can we teach them right from wrong if we aren't even willing to communicate with them?" "You're overwrought," the prince commented. "Perhaps," Jenni said. "Perhaps you're right. But you have to learn that just because someone is a member of what we consider to be an evil race doesn't necessarily mean they themselves are intrinsically evil. I know of many humans who would stab you in the back as soon as they look at you, and yet they belong to what we refer to as a good race. They're human. Hell, I've met some who would even sell their own grandmothers if they thought they could get a good price for her." I think I understand what you're saying," the prince said hesitantly. "Seriously," Jenni said, "I know of at least one other harpy who is both kind and generous to a fault." "Oh? Who?" the prince said. Jenni almost told him right there and then, but she hesitated. "I'm sorry, but it's best if I don't tell you, at least until I know how you'll react to him." "Him?" the prince repeated. He thought for a moment. It's Reyes, isn't it? How? Jenny reacted. The prince grinned. The mysterious brother that no one has ever seen or heard of before? The one who only recently complained to me that there's some secret surrounding him that no one would tell him? Since you have one of the most powerful mages in the land living at this castle, it's not really that hard a conclusion to make. I guess not, Jenny accepted. I admit, after meeting him, I find it hard to believe that Reyes could be evil, Goatee declared. He's not, Jenny insisted. She spoke softly. I don't think there's an evil bone in his body. Still unsure of the prince's intention, she added, He's my brother. Please don't kill him. I should kill him, the prince replied. No, Jenny cried. But I know if I did, I'd lose any chance I have to be with you, the prince told her. Without a doubt, Jenny agreed. The prince seemed to be lost in thought for close to a minute. Then his face broke into an amused grin. I'm going to have a harpy for a brother-in-law. Greatly relieved at the comment, Jenny threw her arms around him. The prince let her hug him. He held her lightly in response and added, I think my father will have a fit. Your father mustn't know, Jenny insisted. She released him. It would also be better if Reyes didn't know what he truly is either. A harpy who doesn't know he's a harpy? The prince sounded quite amused. Please, Jenny pleaded. It's important. The prince put his hand over his heart. You have my word. Thank you, Jenny replied. The prince walked over to a table located next to the bed where Agnart used to sleep and picked up a small golden ring that was lying there next to a pair of silver bracelets. Are you scared that if he were to learn the truth he might revert to type? No, Jenny countered. We're scared that if he were to discover the truth after spending his entire life thinking he was human, then it might be too much for him and he'd go mad. The prince nodded. He tried to put the ring on, but it was too small for his finger, so he returned it to the table. We'll need to be very careful. We'll have to invite my father to both the engagement party and the wedding, and I don't think I'll be able to convince him to leave his mages behind. We must find a way to stop my father from ever meeting your brother. I know, Jenny agreed. Reyes will be awfully upset. It's better for him to be upset than for my father to order his execution.